Welcome back to Killer Stories. I'm your host, Bobby Holmes. I hope you all tuned in last week for my very special episode featuring Stuart Blues, host of the true crime podcast British Murders. If you haven't already, be sure to go back and listen to his episode where I discuss the case of the Chicago Tylenol murders. This week, I'm back to recording solo, and in case you're new to the show, podcasting is my hobby. It's not my full-time job. I wish, but I do have a day job as a dental hygienist. Anyways, if I happen to have a patient in my chair and I get the vibe that they like true crime, you better believe we get to talking about killer stories. That was the case with my patient, Erin Kohler, who is now a faithful listener. Hey, Erin. She emailed with a few hometown stories from Michigan. I added them all to my list, but today I chose to discuss the case of Nancy and Robert Seaman. Their marriage was one filled with domestic abuse and ended in tragedy. Let's start by talking about Nancy. She was born Nancy Ann Donofrio on May 13th, 1952. She was a very smart young lady and was valedictorian of her high school class. Shortly after graduation, she met Robert Seaman. The two fell in love and tied the knot in 1972. They lived in a suburb of Detroit called Farmington Hills. Not long into their marriage, Nancy began experiencing physical and mental abuse from her new husband. One evening, while driving home from Robert's brother's wedding reception, he tried to push Nancy out of the car while it was moving. He was hitting her with his fists, trying to push her out. He was drunk, and according to Nancy, he was drunk often. She said his favorite form of abuse was shoving. He would push her hard into the wall, causing bruising and occasionally knocking her down to the ground. Instead of recognizing the toxicity in her relationship and leaving Robert, Nancy stayed with him and endured the abuse. They had 2 children together. Both were boys. Jeff was born in 1979 and Greg later in 1981. Nancy said that the abuse from Robert was sporadic. It wasn't a daily event, more like it came and went with his mood. As long as things were going well for him, their marriage was peachy keen. But if something went wrong that irritated him, he would take his anger out on Nancy. Robert was an employee at Bob Werner Automotive. As their boys grew older, Nancy decided to go back to school and become a teacher. While attending school, Robert lost his job, which caused a lot of stress and the physical abuse to kick up a notch. Their children began taking notice of the way their father treated their mother. However, as we will hear later in the trial, only one son will speak honestly about their experiences. Jeff, the eldest son, for whatever reason, said that he never witnessed Robert mistreat Nancy. He said, "Yes, Mom had bruises, but she was clumsy." I can attest to that. I bruise like a peach and seriously have no idea the cause 90% of the time. But one area I never get bruises, my face. I don't think those are clumsy kind of bruises, Jeff. Greg was very open about what happened in the Seaman household. Once Nancy started working as an elementary school teacher, her coworkers made comments about her showing up to work with black eyes and obvious signs of domestic abuse. Nancy said, quote, "It never took much. It could be the tone of my voice, the look on my face, some thought he imagined I was having. It became my routine to repair kicked-in doors, damaged drywall, broken furniture, and smashed glassware." When Robert lost his job, Nancy's job as a school teacher was the only source of income for their family. He decided to start his own business and opened batting cages that he named the Upper Deck. The Dumbletons were a family who frequented the Upper Deck. Robert basically became a father figure to their 3 children. He even helped coach them on their baseball teams. Jeff and Greg stated that they felt as if Robert liked the Dumbleton kids better than them, his own children. Julie Dumbleton, mother of the three boys, would volunteer to do the bookkeeping. Rumors started about an affair between Robert and Julie, but it was never proven. Greg said, quote, "We would say that we hoped he was, because the behavior was so eerie that it was the only thing that could possibly explain it." In an attempt to bond with his youngest son, Greg, Bob bought a 1989 Ford Mustang to fix up. It was supposed to bring them closer, a fun project as father and son. Well, the fun didn't last long. Perhaps the reason Greg speaks to Robert's abuse in court is because he experienced it firsthand. Time spent together working on the Mustang was more like time spent talking down to Greg, calling him degrading names while yelling that he didn't know what he was doing. Fast forward to the year 2004. Both boys are out of the house. Their youngest son, Greg, is attending his final year at Purdue University. Nancy was still working as an elementary school teacher. Robert and Nancy's marriage continued to deteriorate over time. They had been living on different floors of the home for quite a while and barely spoke to each other. When they did, it always turned into a fight. Nancy had decided it was finally time to file for a divorce. Enough was enough. She purchased a condo and told Robert it was a graduation present for Greg, but in reality, she had planned to move in. The morning of May 10th, 2004, Nancy and Robert crossed paths in the kitchen. He had just gotten home from a weekend out of town. I've read a few different versions of what started the verbal fight between them. One source said Robert found out about Nancy moving into the condo. Another said it was over the household chores and who was responsible for what. Either way, Robert was holding a kitchen knife during this altercation. He began backing Nancy against a wall, holding the knife up to her. He chased her into the garage where she reached up above the generator and grabbed a hatchet. She hit Robert with the hatchet over and over, 16 times to be exact. Just in case he was still alive, which he wasn't, she reached over and grabbed the kitchen knife he was holding and stabbed Robert 21 more times. I bet you thought this was going to be domestic abuse gone too far and Robert was the one who murdered Nancy, and perhaps that would have been the case if she hadn't grabbed that hatchet. But this is basically an episode of Snapped. In fact, it was. Season 8, Episode 26. I love that show. I gave it a goog, and apparently it is still running, currently in the middle of Season 29. If you've never watched, you need to. The Oxygen series depicts high-profile or bizarre cases of women accused of murder. Each episode outlines the motivation for murder, whether it be revenge against a cheating husband or lover, a large insurance payoff, or the ending to years of abuse, with each murderer's circumstances as unique as the women profiled. Now tell me that doesn't sound right up your alley. The series of events that I just told you was Nancy's side of the story. She is claiming self-defense. Unfortunately, Robert is not able to tell us his side. But now we get to dissect the murder, the events leading up to, and what happened after. The day before the murder was Mother's Day. Robert was out of town and Nancy had the house to herself. She made a trip to Home Depot and purchased a hatchet. Yep, the hatchet she used to murder her husband. Nancy said that she had planned to use it to cut down a tree stump in the front yard, which I find a little suspicious because judging by their landscaping, it was clear that neither of them had been doing any yard work. If I haven't bothered to mow, trim the bushes, or pull weeds, I probably wouldn't say, let's skip that easy stuff and go straight to chopping down this tree stump. And on Mother's Day of all days, the day you're supposed to relax, you decide to go buy a hatchet for yard work? The prosecutor in her case was using the purchase of the hatchet as proof of premeditation. Buying a hatchet is not a crime, but using it the very next day to murder your husband is pretty suspicious. If what Nancy is saying is true, and he chased her into the garage, threatening her with a knife, and she is able to reach the recently purchased hatchet, I'm sure one blow would have injured him enough for her to escape or at least go dial 911. I understand the fear, so I'll give her the benefit of the doubt. 3 blows max necessary to be sure he's down, but 16? That is most definitely overkill. And then to pick up a knife and continue stabbing him. This woman wasn't just protecting herself. It seems as if she wanted him dead. This is what Nancy had to say about it. Quote, "You're reacting impulsively or reflexively out of fear. It's almost a primal instinct to protect yourself. You're not making a rational choice at this point. That feeling of being overpowered, the heaviness of the body on top of me, I perceived that as a continuing attack when in reality he was already dead." Unquote. So pretend you're Nancy. You were threatened with a deadly weapon, you fought back and killed your husband. The thing to do now would be call the police. Explain your actions and that you went a little nutso swinging the hatchet because you were terrified. If she did that, maybe this case would have a much different outcome. This is what Nancy actually did. She took a shower and went to work to teach young elementary students while her husband lies at home dead on the floor of their garage. After school, she made another trip to Home Depot. This time, she bought a tarp, duct tape, and cleaning products, including bleach. When she returned home, she wrapped Robert's body up in a tarp and scrubbed the floor free from blood. Then, she put Robert in the trunk of her car. Actually, it's an SUV, so it's more like inside of the back hatch. And I'm trying to figure out how this is possible for her to do alone. Nancy reportedly weighed 140 pounds. Robert weighed around 180. I can't imagine this 52-year-old woman being able to lift 180 pounds of dead weight, no pun intended, up off the ground and into the trunk. Maybe her adrenaline was pumping and it gave her super strength. Who knows? She continued to drive her car around with Robert in the back. Again, this isn't a concealed trunk. You can see in the window if you look closely. Nancy makes another trip to Home Depot. Surveillance footage shows her shoplifting a hatchet. Then Nancy attempts to return the stolen hatchet with her receipt from the original hatchet, the murder weapon. She is going out of her way to try and cover her tracks. People became concerned about Bob's disappearance. He didn't show up for work and he missed scheduled meetings that day. Police showed up at the Seaman house Tuesday evening. Remember, the murder happened early Monday morning. Nancy played dumb and explained that she didn't know where he was, probably out fulfilling his midlife crisis, she says. She opened her doors and invited them in. I don't know what her plan was. If she was going to dispose of his body, why was he still in her car? If I were Nancy and I made the poor decision to not call the police following the murder of my husband, then I would get rid of any evidence ASAP. Nancy continued to go to work as usual because she wasn't able to find a substitute to fill in for her. Pretty sure I'd be calling in sick versus leaving a crime scene in the garage for the day and then driving to school Tuesday with a corpse in the back of the car. When police came to the house, they questioned Nancy, looked around from inside the living room, and left. But the next day, they were back with a search warrant. Upon searching Nancy's Ford Explorer, they pop the hatch and, surprise, they find Robert. Nancy is charged with first-degree murder, and as I already stated earlier, she pled not guilty, stating it was self-defense. The prosecutor came after her with premeditated murder, their main point being that she bought the hatchet the day before it was used to kill Robert. Not gonna lie, that's quite the coinky-dink. Domestic violence expert Dr. Lenore Walker interviewed Nancy Seaman. She said, quote, "There was no question in my mind that she was a battered woman, that she had suffered, and that she didn't plan to kill him. Nancy was likely triggered by the physical abusive confrontation in the kitchen. I think at that point her fear and terror kicked in, and I don't think she realized what happened afterward," unquote. But when she testified in court, she wasn't allowed to say that. She was only permitted to discuss her research. Dr. Walker is the one who developed the concept of battered woman syndrome. Battered woman syndrome is a psychological condition that can develop when a person experiences abuse, usually at the hands of an intimate partner. It's a unique pattern of behavior and emotions that can develop when a person experiences abuse as they try to find ways to survive the situation. It only took the jury 5 hours to come back with a guilty verdict. They were not able to get past the fact that she bought a hatchet the day before the murder and that Nancy didn't call police after the attack. It seems as if Judge Jack McDonald disagreed with the verdict. He said, quote, "I don't take any pleasure in sentencing you to life in prison, but I have no discretion in imposing the sentence I have to impose by law. I only feel pity for you, and I feel pity for your family." Now, had you only stopped after striking the first blow, because I'm sure that first blow probably rendered your husband unconscious, you could have escaped and we wouldn't be here today. Or had you called the police immediately after the deadly assault, or not tried to cover up the crime scene by destroying evidence in the garage, or had you not attempted to hide your husband's body for 2 days. These are all things that the jurors took into consideration when they concluded that you did deliberate and premeditate the killing of your husband. If you would have done any one of those things I just suggested, they may have come to a different conclusion, unquote. Sue Coates is the executive director of Turning Point, a nonprofit organization supporting domestic violence victims. Sue felt that Nancy was innocent, but understands how the jury came to their decision. She said, quote, "It's very difficult for a jury or the community to understand how somebody could kill somebody in a way that's so brutal. Typically, a victim of domestic violence feels so cornered, so trapped, so isolated, that when they strike back, the situation is one of gross overkill." Judge McDonald's final ruling of life imprisonment did not sit well. She was found guilty of first-degree premeditated murder. In Michigan, that's a life sentence. 8 months later, he lowered Nancy Seaman's sentence to second-degree murder. He said the case lacked evidence to support the premeditated murder charge. He never understood why she would plan to kill her husband when she already had an out. She was so close to moving into her own condo and leaving Robert for good. To him, premeditated murder just didn't add up. She was now eligible for parole in 10 years. But hold on. The Michigan Court of Appeals overturned Judge McDonald, and Nancy Seaman is back to her original conviction. In 2010, Nancy filed an appeal using the theory of battered woman syndrome. Unfortunately, that is not recognized as a defense by Michigan state law, and her appeal was denied. The new judge at this time, Judge Bernard Friedman, ordered a new trial for Nancy, but the motion was denied. Judges see a lot of criminals come through their courtroom, real cold-blooded killers, and both Judge McDonald and Judge Friedman seemed to believe that Nancy Seaman was purely a victim of domestic abuse and suffered from battered woman syndrome. Former Judge Jack McDonald continues to push for Nancy's release. He writes frequent letters to Governor Rick Snyder in attempts to convince him of her innocence. He states that this is one of the cases he felt like the defendant's punishment was way too harsh and it haunts him. Nancy is currently serving her life sentence at Huron Valley Correctional Facility for women. I honestly don't know how I feel about this case. I do believe Nancy was abused. I understand that her reaction to her attack could have caused her to continue swinging that hatchet over and over out of fear. The part I do not understand is that she attempted to hide what happened. It's easy to say how you would react, but I guess you never really know until you're in that situation. But if Nancy Seaman really did plan the murder of Robert, she should have spent a little more time planning the cover-up and disposal. Just saying. I would love to hear what you guys think about this case. Innocent victim of abuse or murderer? Jump on social media and chime in. You can find me on Twitter at Killer Stories PC. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Killer Stories Podcast. Continue sending in those story suggestions to killerstoriespodcast@gmail.com. I've got quite the list going. Thanks again to Aaron Kohler. I do read my DMs, but sometimes they get missed. Email is the best way to make sure I see your story suggestions. If you want to support the show, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/killerstories to make a one-time donation. Shout out to Aaron Franklin for the 10 beers. You're awesome. How the site works is it has donations set in increments of $5, as if you're buying me a coffee or, as I chose, a celebratory beer. But that doesn't mean the money actually goes to booze. I'm saving up for a new microphone and every little bit helps. If you donate, share the show, or just listen, I appreciate you more than you know. Until next time, this has been a killer story.